This program is brought to you by the Reeves Law Firm, www.reevesfirm.com.
In the know.
Good evening, everyone.
In the know. Tony Reeves. Tony Reeves. Tony Reeves. Tony Reeves. Fire. Following the news in any way, shape, or form. No shortage of things to talk about. What does it mean? What will it bring? Is this a reality we simply have to accept? Tony Reeves. Fire. Tony Reeves. Let's go ahead and get started.
How can I tell if I have a good disability case? Whew, okay, this is going to take a little bit, so please be patient with me. A lot of times people come to me and they throw a lot of facts out there about how can I tell if I've got a good disability case? Well, let me kind of give you some method to the madness of kind of determining what your case is. Now, first of all, let me throw out one very good caveat. Well, actually two. One, if you don't know what Social Security has regarding your case, then in the grander scheme of things, you really don't have a true grasp of how quote unquote good your case is. And when most people are asking how good their case is, they're really asking, what are my chances of getting approved? Meaning, do I have enough evidence there to prove my case? So the first thing is, if you don't know what Social Security has, you can't really totally answer that question. The other question comes, how much are you familiar with what is being put in your own medical records? Meaning, a lot of times people focus so much on the diagnosis and that their doctors have given them, or more importantly, what their doctors are telling them, they don't actually know what's in their medical records per se. More importantly, not only not knowing what's in your medical records per se, they don't have a true understanding as what that information actually means. And let me kind of give you an example. Like somebody will say, oh, I got an MRI and it shows bulging in my disc. I'm like, okay, but it could say minimal bulging. It could be significant bulging. It could be, spondylolisthesis. I hate to pronounce that word. Meaning, if the report itself gives a range in terms of what the actual bulging is, the fact that you're focusing on the word bulging does not necessarily mean that it's spectacular. In addition, it's also important to remember your medical records are looked at in what's the nice word I want to say? It's looked at in conjunction with all of your medical evidence. So focusing on one piece of evidence that appears to be good may not give you a good indication as to how good your case really is. So I know that sounds like, okay, you're talking outside of the wind here, Attorney Reeves. What are you basically saying? This is one of the reasons why I'm a strong advocate about having representatives and so forth. And some people will be like, oh, he's full of crap. He's just saying it because he wants to make money off of us. I'm like, I'm not saying me, I'm saying in general. Because the reality is that most people don't truly know how to evaluate how good their case is. Here's the other thing. I know I said two things in terms of you don't know what Social Security has. You don't know what your doctors are saying. But then the third thing is you don't know who the decision maker is. You know why the system is not perfect? Because people are in it. And I hate to say it like that, but the reason why is that, nobody's perfect. That's why we have a judicial system, so that if somebody makes an error of law, you have mechanisms of appeal, so hopefully you can get them to help them get it right, whether it be bad or a good outcome. So I say all that to say, how do you tell, and this is really the more important question, the focus should not be how good my case is, because a lot of times what happens is that I tell people I've seen cases with great evidence get denied and cases with sometimes evidence get approved. So the focus should not be on how good your case is. Your main focus needs to be, what are you doing to ensure that you've proved that you're disabled? Just providing your medical records to them is not enough. But let's go to the overarching question, which is really, how can I tell, go back to my question, how can I tell if I have a good disability case? All right, a couple of things you need to think about. First of all, there are things that you can change, and then there's things that you can't. You can't change your age. I got news for you. If you're between the age of 18 to 49, the burden of proving you're disabled is a little bit higher. Even though it's the same burden across the board, it's tougher because you're considered a younger individuals. So that you're younger individuals, so the regulations they tend to not be in your favor when you're that young. Once you get into the 50 to 54, 55 to 59, 60 to 64 range, as you go up, the regulations tends to take into allowance of the fact that you've now been in the workforce for a period of time. 18 to 49, if you're in your age, you can't affect. Your education, you kind of, but for the most part, you can't. You're educated as you're educated, meaning if you have a high school degree or higher, including a GED, Social Security tends to take that information in consideration in terms of your ability to learn new jobs, as opposed to somebody who hasn't graduated from high school or maybe hasn't even gone as far as the 9th or 10th grade. Same thing about your work experience. The whole notion is that your work experience is really supposed to give an indication of what you've done in the past. And let me just be blunt. You learn things from every job you're at. That's the general overarching opinion. With the exception of unskilled jobs, it's generally assumed that you're going to learn something from a job that you can use at another job, even if you're not doing that same job again. Guess what? If you're a cashier at Wendy's and you apply for a job at a gas station as a cashier, guess what? Cashiering job is basically about the same. The environment is different, but you still learn cashiering skills from one job that can be used as a cashier in another. So then when people ask me how good is my case, I say, well, really what you're asking ultimately is, how good are my medical records in terms of proving it? Part of the problem that most people run across is that they focus on the diagnosis. They focus on the diagnosis, meaning I have been diagnosed with this. And I've said this in prior videos, and I have not meant to be disrespectful when I say this because it's not meant to be nasty. But every diagnosis has a range of limitations to it. There are some people who have diagnosis of a condition and they are still able to function, and then there are people who have diagnosis of the same condition whose level of functioning is significantly reduced. Guess what? There are a lot of people out there working with diabetes, but then there's some people who are on dialysis and have retinopathy, problems with their vision, neuropathy, and sort of burning in their hands and their feet, and they can't work. So please don't focus on the diagnosis. That's the first thing. Second thing is you need to ask yourself, what are the doctors saying about what you can and you can't do? Because that's really what Social Security is focusing on. They're looking at what are your limitations. The fact that a doctor is prescribing you significant pain medication and diagnosing you with a bad back does not of itself give Social Security the opportunity to evaluate what you can and you can't do. You want to help them get an idea of what are your limitations. More importantly, what are your doctors saying about your limitations? So when you're trying to decide how good my case is, you need to ask yourself a couple of things. One, what am I going to the doctor for? What are they treating me for? Two, has the doctor rendered an opinion about my ability to do things? Listen carefully when I say this. This is not me being disrespectful. Your doctor saying you're disabled does nothing for you in the grander scheme of things, because Social Security has they're the final decision maker whether you are or you're not disabled. What they need the doctor to tell them is, what can you do despite your impairments? So you need to be asking the question, hey doc, I know, especially for the docs who don't like filling out forms, just ask them, hey doc, what do you think I can and can't do? Because that's really what Social Security wants to know about. And more importantly, you want to know what your doctors think you can and you can't do, because that lets you know whether or not, one, you have an disagreement with their limitations, or two, if there's more things you need to do with regards to it. So I say all that not trying to be disrespectful, that if you're trying to determine how good your case is, the first starting point really is your medical evidence. Do you have medical, and this is what you need to kind of keep in your mind. I'm going to lay it out for you. Start with the first point. What can you do and what can't you do? That's really your starting point. And think about it in an employment situation, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. What is it that you can and you can't do? And do not think generally, think specifically. And when I say that, you're like, what do you mean by that? Meaning, don't go back on saying, I can't work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Listen to me when I say this. Social Security doesn't know what you can and you can't do. So giving some blanket overview of what you can and can't do does not solve the problem for them trying to determine what you can and you can't do. Break it down. Can you sit for 6 hours out of an 8-hour workday? Can you stand or walk 6 hours out of an 8-hour workday? Can you focus? Can you concentrate? Can you deal with getting around chemicals and fluids? Can you deal with focusing on a particular task? You need to be reminded of things. Do you do well with the public? Do you do well with your coworkers? Do you do well with your supervisors? Are you able to handle changes in your workplace? All of those things you need to answer your question. So the first thing you need to say is, what can I and can't I do? Now that's the easy part. Here's the hard part. Do you have any doctors that support those limitations? That's how you determine whether your case is a good case or not. What can I do And what can I do? Do I have any doctors that will support what I can and can't do? That lets you know. So what happens when you say, well, I had a doctor that was doing it. Yeah, okay. So if you get over the hurdle, let's say that you have a doctor that's supporting what you're saying, then becomes the third final step. Does the doctor's reports support the limitations they're giving you? So you're like, Attorney Reeves, you're just giving me all kind of homework. Explain this to me one more time. Say it once more. Okay. What can you and can't you do? That's your first thing. Secondly, is there any doctors out there that you go and treat with that support those limitations? And if the answer is yes, does the doctor's records support what the doctor is saying? If the answer is yes to all three, like let's say your limitation. Now, first of all, let's go back to the first part where we said, what are your limitations? What can you, can't you do? Be mindful. The idea is that Social Security is going to look at those limitations and say, are there jobs out there available? So if you tell me your limitations and I listen to those limitations, and I believe, and not just me, just Social Security believes that those limitations will allow you the ability to do a full-time job, it almost doesn't matter if you get to 2 and 3 because the first thing is really the biggest rump shaker. So let's say that your limitations are one that prevents you from being able to work. You can't get along well with the public, coworkers, supervisors. You can't do simple tasks. You can't focus. You can't concentrate. You're missing at least 4 or 5 days a month because of your condition. You can't sit for long periods. You can't walk, whatever the case may be. Now you got a doctor that supports it. Do you? Because that's really your biggest question. Do you have a doctor that will support it? Okay, so you got a doctor that says, yes, your limitations are exactly what they said. Then we go to the last step. What's the last step? Do they support, do the records the doctor rely upon support it? Meaning, if a doctor is sitting here saying that your back is so devastating that you can't do anything, but there's no x-rays, no MRIs, no CAT scans, no CTs, no nerve conduction studies, you are not taking any significant pain medication, they haven't sent you for physical therapy, chiropractic treatment, TENS units, epidural shots, none of those things, then what's going to happen is that Social Security is going to say, how, if you don't have any of that evidence to support you, are you making that determination? And you probably would say, because he's seen me for a long time, but they're not relying on any testing to support it. Long story short, and this is one of my longer videos, here's what I tell you to do. When you're trying to decide whether or not your case is a strong case, because I always tell people, well, should I just drop it? No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that what happens is that a lot of times people go in blind. You really don't have a good idea. And so when you send a message to various representatives saying, here are all the facts of my case, and really you're just giving statements. You're not really giving facts. You're giving your facts as you know them, but not necessarily what's in your evidence in your file as to why you believe your medical condition disables you and that you have a good case. But those are the 3 components that you need to focus on. Is what are your limitations? Is there a doctor that can support it? And does that doctor have supportive evidence to support it as well? Those things will be the things that you can look at that should be able to tell you whether you have a good case or not. Tune in next week as we talk about how to engage and speak to an attorney here on Q&A Social Security Disability Today.